understand religion. And it should be a very fun event. Please don't interrupt when speakers are talking. We've got two very distinguished speakers tonight. Please don't interrupt them. We'll have a session on questions after we've given both speakers a chance to say what they're here to say. And without further delay, we'll start. Okay, so the first speaker is Jay Smith, who was born and grew up in India before spending a short time in America before moving into London 14 years ago. He currently trains people to work with Muslims and is an apologist, which I didn't know what that meant, but he's a debater. So he's a professional in what he does. At the moment he's studying for a doctorate at the London School of Theology. So we can invite Jay to please up and
Islam and Christianity, that we define what we mean by Christianity and what we mean by Islam. And I'm assuming, and I will ask my Sheikh Milani if I'm correct, that as we define Christianity and as we define Islam, we define it by what the Revelation says, so that both Christianity and Islam must be defined by a foundational piece of scripture. In the case of Christianity, it is the New Testament. In the case of Islam, it will be the Quran. And I assume also the traditions, the Sunnah of the Prophet. But they also must be modeled by somebody. Now that's the case with all three Abrahamic faiths. So if you have Judaism, they will define themselves not only by their scriptures in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of Moses, but they will also be modeled by Moses. For Christians, we look to the Gospels of Jesus Christ, the New Testament, and we look to Jesus as our model. And for the Muslims, I'm assuming that the Quran and the Sunnah are modeled by the Prophet Muhammad himself. If we can use that as a standard tonight, if we can use that revelatory process plus the model for each, I think we can go a long ways into understanding how is it we can find peace today. The reason I say that is I think there is a propensity in the world today to look at what Christians are doing today versus what Muslims are doing today and assume that represents Islam or Christianity. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to sit here and go tit for tat. We Christians did this, you Muslims did that, and all the way for the last 1,400 years. I think it's more important that we go back to the foundational material itself. And therefore, I will start and I will end with Scripture. And I will start and I will end with Jesus Christ. He is my model. He is my paradigm. Everything I do has to be modeled on him. So let's go back and let's ask, is Christianity a religion of peace? I don't think there are too many people that would say Christianity is not a religion of peace if you look at our revelation and if you look at Jesus Christ. That's not to say that there is not violence in Christianity. Certainly, for the last 200 years, there has been lots of violence in Christianity. But let me go back and let's open Scripture. Let's go to the Bible. And let's go and see what the Bible has to say concerning peace. As a Christian, I go to the New Testament. The New Testament is my paradigm. The New Testament is my authority. The New Testament is where I go to find out how I'm to live today. And when I go back to the New Testament, I find verse after verse after verse that talks about peace. Let me give you some examples. The word peace in Greek is irene, and you will find that word used right across in every book of the New Testament. You will find in Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, where it says, "Blessed are the peacemakers." In the same chapter, verse 39 to 44, it talks more specifically that those who slap you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek to him. Also love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Continuing on down with Matthew chapter 22, verse 37 to 40, it says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depends the whole law and the prophets." Matthew chapter 26, verse 52. And that's the situation where Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was going to be arrested that night, and he was being arrested. And while he was being arrested, one of his disciples, Peter, took a sword and cut off the ear of the servant. And at that time, Jesus turned towards the servant, put the ear back on the servant, turned towards Peter, and said this, "Put away your sword, for he who lives by the sword shall die by the sword." And that's the paradigm that we're looking for. That's the revelation we're looking for. And that's the example of Jesus Christ. I think that is foundational for everything else I'm going to say tonight. That story can also be found in Luke chapter 22, verses 49 to 51, and also in John chapter 18, verse 11. In Luke chapter 6, verse 27, it says not only to love others, but to love your enemies. And then in Romans 10, verse 15, which is the letter written by Paul himself, we find the gospel of peace, defined as such, and that we are to preach this gospel of peace. We also find that in Acts 10 and Ephesians 6. Romans chapter 12, just 2 chapters later, it says, "If possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men." In 2 Corinthians 13, verse 11, it says, "Live in peace, and the God of love and peace will be with you." In Colossians 3, verse 15, "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts." In 1 Thessalonians 5, 13 to 16, it says, "Live in peace with one another, see that no one repays evil for evil, but as always seek after that which is good for one another and for all people." And 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 11, "Seek peace and pursue it." Now, I could go on. There's quite a few more that I could have used. I just went and did a quick view last night to see how many verses we have on peace in the New Testament. And it runs in the tens. There's so many of them, I don't have time to do that today. Now, that's not to say that the early church was only peaceful. And we find certainly that there was those who were not peaceful. Not so much in the early church, but in the church that began, and certainly the church that we now know today. And you will find instances where peace was not used in the church. Instances in the time of Constantine, the 4th century. Instances such as during the Inquisition in Spain. Instances such as the Crusades. And I hear many people who question me and say, "What about the church and peace? What about the example of your church, Mr. Smith?" Now, I always say, if you're going to talk about the history of Christianity, you have to always answer one thing. And I do this all the time, and I say, whenever we talk about the violence that the church has done, we need to ask whether or not that church has been following the example of Jesus Christ. I do that purposely, because as I said at the very beginning of this talk, in order for me to know who I am, in order for me to know what I'm to do, I have to go back to the example of Jesus Christ. And I ask one very simple question. What would Jesus have said about the Inquisition? What would Jesus have said about the Crusades? What would Jesus have said what happened at the time of Constantine in the 4th century? And the colonial experience, much of which was brought into church to many nations. And in every case, I would have to answer that Jesus would have condemned the Crusades. He would have condemned the Inquisition. He would have had to, because in order to be consistent to the gospel of Jesus Christ, he would have to condemn it. Now, that's important to me, because if I start from that premise of who Jesus Christ is, then I can end in that premise on